Side 2 of this lovely rare record. It's a 10-inch record, 33 RPM vinyl record, and it's the essays of Francis Bacon, the 16th century philosopher, on Plantagenet Productions. This is the cover. It's virtually a private pressing, really. It must have been a very small production. Essays by Francis Bacon, spoken by Dorothy Rose Gribble. Memory serves me right, she made some appearances in the Doctor Who series on BBC television, and Noel Lloyd, who is an actor, and I think he may have had a bookshop as well. Plantagenet Productions, Recorded Library, Westbridge, Highclere, Newbury Barks. Essays by Bacon, selected and spoken by Dorothy Rose Gribble and Noel Lloyd. You've already heard side 1. I'm not sure that the print on this for the titles is totally correct. But side 2, which we should be listening to now, of marriage and the single life, of wisdom, of a man's self, of truth, of adversity. Francis Bacon to the Duke of Buckingham, Lord High Admiral of England, 1607. Mono recording by John Hassell from the original tape made at Westbridge Studios, Highclere, Plantagenet Productions. They did several other titles, and if anybody can provide me with a copy of any of these, I'd be delighted. 33 RPM vinyl record. The pressing, or the address anyway for the pressing, was 33 Nassau Road, Barnes, London, Southwest 13. I'm guessing it's probably late 50s, early 60s. Let's have a listen.
Some, in their discourse, desire rather commendation of wit, in being able to hold all arguments, than of judgment, in discerning what is true. As if it were a praise to know what might be said, and not what should be thought. Some have certain commonplaces and themes wherein they are good, and want variety, which kind of poverty is for the most part tedious, and when it is once perceived, ridiculous. The honourablest part of talk is to give the occasion, and again to moderate and pass to somewhat else, for then a man leads the dance. It is good in discourse and speech of conversation to vary and intermingle speech of the present occasion with arguments, tales with reasons, asking of questions with telling of opinions, and jest with earnest, for it is a dull thing to tire, and as we say now, to jade anything too far. As for jest, there be certain things which ought to be privileged from it, namely religion, matters of state, great persons, any man's present business of importance, and any case that deserveth pity. Yet there be some that think their wits have been asleep, except they dart out somewhat that is piquant, and to the quick. That is a vein which would be bridled. And generally, men ought to find the difference between saltness and bitterness. Certainly, he that hath the satirical vein, as he maketh others afraid of his wit, so he had need be afraid of others' memory. He that questioneth much shall learn much, and content much, but especially if he apply his questions to the skill of the persons whom he asketh. For he shall give them occasion to please themselves in speaking, and himself shall continually gather knowledge. But let his questions not be troublesome, for that is fit for a poser. And let him be sure to leave other men their turns to speak. Nay, if there be any that would reign and take up all the time, let him find means to take them off, and to bring others on, as musicians used to do with those that dance too long galliards. If you dissemble sometimes your knowledge of that you are thought to know, you shall be thought another time to know that you know not. Speech of a man's self ought to be seldom and well chosen. I knew one was wont to say in scorn, he must needs be a wise man, he speaks so much of himself. And there is but one case wherein a man may commend himself with good grace, and that is in commending virtue in another, especially if it be such of a virtue whereunto himself pretendeth. Speech of touch towards others should be sparingly used, for discourse ought to be as a field, without coming home to any man. I knew two noblemen of the west part of England, whereof the one was given to scoff, but kept ever royal cheer in his house. The other would ask of those that had been at the other's table, "Tell truly, was there never a flout or dry blow given?" To which the guest would answer, "Such and such a thing passed." The lord would say, "I thought he would mar a good dinner." Discretion of speech is more than eloquence, and to speak agreeably to him with whom we deal is more than to speak in good words or in good order. A good continued speech without a good speech of interlocution shows slowness, and a good reply or second speech without a good settled speech shows shallowness and weakness, as we see in beasts that those that are weakest on the course are yet nimblest in the turn, as it is betwixt the greyhound and the hare. To use too many circumstances ere one come to the matter is wearisome. To use none at all is blunt.
Virtue is like a rich stone, best plain set. And surely virtue is best in a body that is comely, though not of delicate features, and that hath rather dignity of presence and beauty of aspect. Neither is it almost seen that very beautiful persons are otherwise of great virtue, as if nature were rather busy not to err, than in labour to produce excellency. And therefore they prove accomplished, but not of great spirit, and study rather behaviour than virtue. But this holds not always, for Augustus Caesar, Titus Vespasianus, Philip le Bel of France, Edward IV of England, Alcibiades of Athens, Ismail the Sophy of Persia, were all high and great spirits, and yet the most beautiful men of their times. In beauty that of favour is more than that of colour, and that of decent and gracious motion more than that of favour. That is the best part of beauty which a picture cannot express, no, nor the first sight of the life. There is no excellent beauty that hath not some strangeness in the proportion. A man cannot tell whether Apelles or Albert Dürer were the more trifler, whereof the one would make a personage by geometrical proportions, the other by taking the best parts out of divers faces to make one excellent. Such personages, I think, would please nobody but the painter that made them. Not but I think a painter may make a better face than ever was, but he must do it by a kind of felicity as a musician that maketh an excellent air in music, and not by rule. A man shall see faces that if you examine them part by part you shall never find a good, and yet altogether do well. If it be true that the principal part of beauty is in decent motion, certainly it is no marvel, though persons in years seem many times more amiable. Pulchrorum autumnus pulcher. For no youth can be comely but by pardon, and considering the youth as to make up the comeliness. Beauty is as summer fruits, which are easy to corrupt and cannot last, and, for the most part, it makes a dissolute youth, and an age a little out of countenance. But yet, certainly, again, if it light well, it maketh virtue shine, and vices blush.
Suspicions among thoughts are like bats among birds. They ever fly by twilight. Certainly they are to be repressed, or at the least well guarded. For they cloud the mind, they lose friends, and they check with business, whereby business cannot go on currently and constantly. They dispose kings to tyranny, husbands to jealousy, wise men to irresolution and melancholy. They are defects, not in the heart, but in the brain. For they take place in the stoutest natures, as in the example of Henry VII of England. There was not a more suspicious man, nor a more stout. And in such a composition they do small hurt, for commonly they are not admitted, but with examination, whether they be likely or no. But in fearful natures they gain ground too fast. There is nothing makes a man suspect much, more than to know little, and therefore men should remedy suspicion by procuring to know more. and not keep their suspicions in smother, what would men have? Do they think those they employ and deal with are saints? Do they not think they will have their own ends and be truer to themselves than to them? Therefore there is no better way to moderate suspicions than to account upon such suspicions as true and yet bridle them as false. For so far a man ought to make use of suspicions as to provide as, if that be true that he suspects, yet it may do him no hurt. Suspicions that the mind of itself gathers are but buzzes, but suspicions that are artificially nourished and put into men's heads by the tales and whisperings of others have stings. Certainly, the best means to clear the way in this same wood of suspicions is frankly to communicate them with the party that he suspects, for thereby he shall be sure to know more of the truth of them than he did before, and withal shall make that party more circumspect, not to give further cause of suspicion. But this would not be done to men of base natures, for they, if they find themselves once suspected, will never be true. The Italian says, "Suspicion discharges faith," as if suspicion did give a passport to faith, but it ought rather to kindle it, to discharge itself.
Riches are for spending, and spending for honour and good actions. Therefore, extraordinary expense must be limited by the worth of the occasion. For voluntary undoing may be as well for a man's country as for the kingdom of heaven. But ordinary expense ought to be limited by a man's estate, and governed with such regard as it be within his compass, and not subject to deceit and abuse of servants, and ordered to the best show that the bills may be less than the estimation abroad. Certainly, if a man will keep but of even hand, his ordinary expenses ought to be but to the half of his receipts, and if he think to wax rich, but to the third part. It is no baseness for the greatest to descend and look into their own estate. Some forbear it not upon negligence alone, but doubting to bring themselves into melancholy in respect they shall find it broken. But wounds cannot be cured without searching. He that cannot look into his own estate at all had need both choose well them whom he employeth, and change them often, for new are more timorous and less subtle. He that can look into his estate but seldom, it behoveth him to turn all to certainties. A man had need, if he be plentiful in some kind of expense, to be as saving again in some other, as if he be plentiful in diet, to be saving in apparel, if he be plentiful in the hall, to be saving in the stable and the like. For he that is plentiful in expenses of all kinds will hardly be preserved from decay. In clearing of a man's estate, he may as well hurt himself in being too sudden, as in letting it run on too long. For hasty selling is commonly as disadvantageable as interest. Besides, he that clears at once will relapse, for finding himself out of straits, he will revert to his customs. But he that cleareth by degrees induceth a habit of frugality, and gaineth as well upon his mind as upon his estate. Certainly, who hath a state to repair may not despise small things, and commonly it is less dishonourable to abridge petty charges than to stoop to petty gettings. A man ought warily to begin charges, which once begun will continue, but in matters that return not, he may be more magnificent.
These things are but toys to come among such serious observations. But yet, since princes will have such things, it is better they should be graced with elegancy than daubed with cost. Dancing to song is a thing of great state and pleasure. I understand it that the song be in choir, placed aloft, and accompanied with some broken music, and the ditty fitted to the device. Acting in song, especially in dialogues, hath an extreme good grace. I say acting, not dancing, for that is a mean and vulgar thing, and the voices of the dialogue would be strong and manly, a bass and a tenor, no treble, and the ditty high and tragical, not nice or dainty. Several choirs place one over against another, and taking the voice by catches, anthem-wise, give great pleasure. Turning dances into figure is a childish curiosity. And generally let it be noted that those things which I here set down are such as do naturally take the sense, and not respect petty wonderments. It is true, the alteration of scenes, so it be quietly and without noise, are things of great beauty and pleasure, for they feed and relieve the eye before it be full of the same object. Let the scenes abound with light, especially coloured and varied, and let the maskers, or any other that are to come down from the scene, have some notions upon the scene itself before their coming down, for it draws the eye strangely, and makes it with great pleasure to desire to see that it cannot perfectly discern. Let the songs be loud and cheerful, and not chirpings or pulings. Let the music likewise be sharp and loud, and well placed. The colours that show best by candlelight are white, carnation, and a kind of sea-water green. And O's, or spangs, so they are of no great cost, so they are of most glory. As for rich embroidery, it is lost and not discerned. Let the suits of the maskers be graceful, and such as become the persons when the vizards are off, not after examples of known attires, Turks, soldiers, mariners, and the like. Let anti-masks not be long. They have been commonly of fools, satyrs, baboons, wild men, antiques, beasts, sprites, witches, Ethiops, pygmies, turkettes, nymphs, rustics, cupids, statues moving, and the like. As for angels, it is not comical enough to put them in anti-masks, and anything that is hideous as devils, giants, is, on the other side, as unfit. But chiefly, let the music of them be recreative, and with some strange changes. Some sweet odours suddenly coming forth without any drops falling are, in such a company, as there is steam and heat, things of great pleasure and refreshment. Double masks, one of men, another of ladies, addeth state and variety, but all is nothing, except the room be kept clear and neat. For justs and tourneys and barriers, the glories of them are chiefly in the chariots, wherein the challengers make their entry, especially if they be drawn with strange beasts, as lions, bears, camels, and the like, or in the devices of their entrance, or in bravery of their liveries, or in the goodly furniture of their horses and armour. But enough of these toys.